All right, then I guess we'll get started. So welcome. Honeypot Investigations, using data to analyze mass exploitation attacks and how to pick the world's longest title for a talk. Hopefully everyone's having a good lunch, and it's always fun to do this in person again. So quick introduction, so we all get to know each other. I see name tags, but I assume those aren't everyone's name tags. My name is Nick Roy. I live in Boston, work at GreyNoise, and always like presenting at a whole bunch of different conferences on all sorts of fun things, North Korea and Wi-Fi hacking. We'll keep the introductions really short. Cats, Gilmore Girls, and dive bars. So I'm sure we can find things to do later if anyone wants to hang out. We have about 30-ish minutes today, I think, somewhere around there. A little bit of what we're going to cover today. We'll tell a couple of jokes along the way. But what is this idea of internet background noise? I think everyone knows everyone's scanning the internet at all times. But really, what's going on? What are people scanning for? What are the kind of weird things that they're looking for? There's all sorts of cool little interesting things you can find when you really start looking at it. And that's really what a lot of this is looking at. What are people scanning for? Why are they doing this scanning? So we'll go through some of this today, and then we'll wrap it up. I also like sharing all sorts of data, so we can, I have all this online if anyone wants to take a look at it. So what is internet background noise? This is the idea that I'm sure everyone is very familiar with, but anything exposed to the internet at any time is getting hammered with scans. GreyNoise, we have a bunch of sensors deployed all over the internet. So instead of scanning, we listen to people scanning the internet. And so this is just rough numbers about what we see, about 3,000 probes a day from about 1,000 different IP addresses for any device connected to the internet. That's a lot of noise. There's a lot of garbage in there. People stuffing credentials, people looking for misconfigurations, people that are looking for vulnerabilities all over the internet. And then there's a whole bunch of, we'll call them good guys, people trying to index the internet, security companies scanning the internet. To sum it up, the internet is just a really noisy place, man. This is something we built. The graphic on the left is pretty cool. So that is every little dot on there is a /24. So over a span of about 6 months, the brighter it is, the more activity we saw from it. So there is a lot of internet scanning going on at all the time. We won't do a show of hands to see who is contributing to this, but I'm sure there are a couple of people, thank you, myself included, that are causing some of this problem, but everyone's scanning the internet at all the time, really for different reasons. And this kind of changes things a little bit, because before we always thought of this as, hey, we're going to go out and just pick one specific target. We're going to research the hell out of it. We're going to scan it, enumerate, do all the fun things that we do, find vulnerabilities, exploit vulnerabilities, and success. We're in. This changes a little bit now that we see tools like MassScan and ZMap, and everyone can scan the internet in 5-6 minutes. Where now what we want to do is just pick any vulnerability. Doesn't matter which one. Blast the hell out of the internet with it. Keep scanning until we find a bunch of devices we can compromise. Make sure we're the only ones who are in there at a certain point, because I don't want someone else coming along and taking my work. So we keep our access, and then we just turn around and sell access. So this changes things a little bit from what we've seen, where now people are just picking vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and just targeting that, as opposed to targeting certain organizations. So we did an experiment because we were kind of curious. We wanted to say, look, we have this list of IP addresses that are scanning the internet all the time. Let's take 2 different boxes. We'll stand them up on the internet. They just have default credentials on them. Nothing too scientific here. One of them, we're going to take the list of all the IPs we've seen scanning the internet. The other one, we're just going to leave it out there. With the idea being, what happens if we leave one that's just blocking every IP address we've seen scan the internet? And we'll see what happens and compare. So we learned something really interesting. The one that was unblocked, probably not a surprise, took 19 minutes for someone to log in with the default credentials. I think we were all surprised it took 19 whole minutes. I probably would have guessed a little lower, but 19 is pretty good. We saw about 32 successful logins a day with about 200 attempts an hour. That poor box got hammered. The other one, where we took the whole list of IPs we've seen scanning the internet all the time and blocked all those, it actually took 4 days before someone actually logged in. Much less attempts per day we saw on this, much less logins per day after that. So we learned 2 things. This list of IPs is good for about 4 days before it becomes garbage. People are recycling IP addresses and servers very quickly. But we can actually just cut down on a lot of the garbage we see. So this is all well and good, and we can talk about this all day long, how to take this data, how to operationalize it, and what to do with it. But I still had a ton of questions because sure, people are logging in, but what are people actually doing with this now? Once they are logged in, what are they calling back to? If I let someone log in and just let them live on my box for 2-3 days, what are they doing with it? So we had a whole bunch of other questions, and that's really what we started looking at also was everyone's out there scanning the internet, everyone's out there exploiting the internet, but what do they actually do after this? And that's what I wanted to know. So there's a whole bunch of weird things you can start to find when you look at people scanning the internet. We have about 5,000 sensors deployed across the internet. So I stole some of our data. I built some of my own tools to do this. And I wanted to know what are people doing out there because it just seemed a little too weird, some of the things that we were finding. So we would see weird spikes in activity on people scanning for certain ports or attempting to exploit over certain ports. I don't know what's on port 41,868. I don't think that's a default for anything. I didn't actually look. I just made that assumption. But there's a whole bunch of weird ports we saw just spiking 200-300% day over day. So I really wanted to know why, what is going on there? So cut out the top 20 ports from the nmap flag. And what was left over that I was seeing on my own little box as I was leaving was the same thing. Port 52,000 people were hammering and all sorts of random ports. And it just said, why? There can't be anything good on these. So we pulled some data. This was actually the coolest one. We pulled the top 50 noisy hosts looking for RDP across the internet. And it turns out people are really clever. Don't just put RDP on a different port. That doesn't work. I think everyone knows that because these are the 50 noisiest IPs that we saw scanning for it. Most of them are looking on 3389, but there are a whole bunch of them that are looking, some of them are scanning all 65,000 ports across the internet. People out there will find it. But I really wanted to know more because I think we all know this. You can't just change the port. Don't be clever and put it on 33899. They're gonna find that. Everyone tries it, it doesn't work. It's just like putting SSH on 2222. Doesn't work, but what exactly are these devices that are scanning? Because now I really wanted to know what is this? So first of all, Shodan also finds about 7,000 different servers with RDP exposed on 7,000 different ports. So I said, okay, there's got to be something here. But what are these devices doing the scanning? Because hiding it on 389 probably doesn't work. So I picked the top 20 noisiest hosts that we saw scanning. And there were two things in common. This top one, Windows 10, pulled all this data from Shodan when it was scanning the internet. This is what was exposed, and Windows 8.1. And I thought, cool, this is pretty easy to figure out. I'm just working off of banner information here, but the top one is vulnerable to Eternal Blue. Okay, pretty easy. You can find some interesting things in there, like 5 of the noisy hosts on Windows 10 all came from the same provider. I'm assuming they all deploy with the same old image of Windows and are just getting popped as soon as they come online. Windows 8, I didn't actually look into anything on it, but I'm assuming it's pretty easy to compromise those. The last 4 of the top 20 were all fully patched Windows servers, and just have to wonder what was going on there, why that's blasting the internet. But it's pretty easy to find providers that are just using old Windows images, because it turns out really quickly, all of those hosts that we see, a lot of them are just built off of providers that they seem like they're kind of small. And I would be willing to guess they're just using old images of Windows and no one is actually updating them before exposing it to the internet. So there's a lot of noise coming from a lot of devices. The other thing we started to see a lot of, we called this a love story as old as time. You scan from one IP, you download something from another IP. There's also a lot of compromised devices online. And this was also something we wanted to know more about. So as I started looking into this, started to say, hey, let's look at some of these IPs we're downloading things from. So I picked one. And when I say I picked one, I mean, I went through a whole bunch of them until I found an interesting one for a talk. And it was in this scripts directory, and it's pretty obvious to tell what's going on. It downloads a bash script, it executes it. Okay, great. That's not a great talk if we show that. But let's look at the rest of the directories on here. This is the mini seed extension. I don't know what that is offhand. I looked it up. There's a bunch of colleges and EDUs that were talking about this, and I still said, I don't really understand what all of this means. So let's just go to the root of it. I said, wow, this is kind of cool. It's really interactive. There's all sorts of charts and graphs and real-time things. I still don't understand what this is. Thankfully, there's documentation right on this device. This is great when this happens because it turns out it is a device for monitoring seismic activity in Germany. Cool. My favorite thing happened. Their documentation has a search. So I searched what everyone in here, I'm assuming, would search, admin. And I probably could have guessed this, but it turns out the default password is admin. Who would have thought? I don't want to say I did this. I have a friend, we'll say. My friend logged in, and there's a really nice upload button right there on this device where you can upload files. My friend also conveniently sent me a screenshot that fits right into my slide deck. Great friends. So as I started to look into it more, there are a lot of compromised devices. There's a lot of devices scanning the internet. And there's a whole bunch of weird things when you really start to look into it. This is one of my favorite ones. We'll put this up here for a second and see if anyone catches what I thought was interesting. And then check and see if anyone else caught the fun things. Because maybe you see this and you said, Android 7, that's old. Yeah, you guys are all way better at spelling because about 2 days later I went, oh man, what an idiot. Every single word is misspelled in this user agent. That's super embarrassing that everyone called that out already. It was a good solid 2 days before I was sitting there, like, something's weird in here. So everything is misspelled in this user agent. We have a whole list of just super weird user agents that we see across the internet. There's all sorts of fun ones out there. This one in particular, I really like because one of my other favorite sources is going to GitHub. And there are a ton of like really terrible script kiddie tools using this user agent. DNS enumeration, scanning for misconfigurations, a bunch of really hacky port scanners out there. And they're all using this user agent. And I really don't know why, because it's very easy to pick up on with all of the misspellings 3 days later when you finally realize it. And then you can easily find all these tools just based off of the misspellings. And then you start to find the really fun things like people taking credit for their work. Anonymous Fox, great group. Not only do we have really easy indicators we can find on GitHub, but now what you can find is all of their tutorial videos. How to use their tools, how they work. This was a 4-part series and it didn't have the little handycam watermark like all the YouTube videos have. This was a legit produced video, 4-part series on using their tools. I was like, wow, from a really crappy user agent to all of their tutorials, really, really quickly you can find. So as you start to look into this, there's actually a lot of thought put into these tools. There's a lot of information out there that you can find, especially just off of some of the little things you can key off of, like weird user agents that they're using. But I still had more questions because, okay, we see all this scan activity now. That's great. What if I just leave a couple boxes exposed on the internet? Because honeypots are cool, but they don't do everything I want them to do. Well, my flight changed and I had to run to the airport. And then I got a really nasty email from DigitalOcean. Yeah, okay, that's my fault. I set it up with a default password and I didn't do anything because I had to run. So we'll rethink this a little bit. We'll be a little more sophisticated here. So now what I can do is set up a couple of servers, a couple of, we'll call them internal servers. They don't have a public IP because I wanted to know, is anyone trying to move laterally? I set up a firewall. Everything is allowed inbound. Nothing is allowed outbound, except I log everything on those servers. I send it off to a Splunk server, logs all the commands, logs all the network connections. And the cool thing about this is now I don't have to worry about running a honeypot. Now I can just let people run wild and sit there for days at a time. And this was fun because Now I can start to find that, oh yeah, everyone is just trying to mine cryptocurrency is always the most popular thing. Super easy to detect. I'm sure everyone sees this. This one is not that exciting. What is exciting though, is when you start to find, I always assume people are just scanning the internet, blasting things out across the internet, and just deploying really crappy malware on it. This was actually super cool. This was one of the first things that I found. Someone from the UK logged in and they dropped a bash script that was just heavily obfuscated. So, okay, take some time, tear that apart. This was already running and it can't connect out anywhere, which is nice because this took a while to figure out. Downloads a whole bunch of Linux utilities, which being the good admin, I already had them installed. I was a little hurt, but tries to download everything it needs. It runs a bunch of queries to find a relay, the Tor proxy server to make requests over. And then it sends a custom request to generate an executable to some static onion site. And then it does a whole bunch of other things to maintain persistence in there. But it generates a unique executable, which I thought was super cool because I ran the script once, I dropped it on a different box and ran it. No matches found in VirusTotal. And I thought, wow, that's kind of neat. So it actually takes a whole bunch of information from your system. Your user, your IP address, it hashes a bunch of information about processor type and current date, output from a bunch of different commands, base64 encodes a whole bunch of other data about your system. It cats all that together, and then that's part of the request it makes. And then you always get back a different executable. And I thought, wow, super cool. I'm actually really impressed. I thought this was all just going to be people dropping things that would be kind of easy to find. And then I started doing some more research, and I found out that Fortinet already identified this. I thought, damn it, just a little too slow. They had a whole really nice write-up I found right after I did all this digging into it. Starts to download more executables. The custom one, it checks for a whole bunch of different IP addresses to see if you're connected to it. Some of the interesting things it does, it also tries killing certain running processes. Some of them are related specifically to Alibaba Cloud. Tries to read a bunch more information, and then it goes in and downloads all the commodity stuff, Mirai and all of that. But this was actually super cool. I was actually really impressed. It took about 3-4 days to actually unpack all this, and I thought, wow, this is a little bit more than just someone scanning the internet and hoping to get lucky. This one was pretty cool. Now, the other cool thing we can do, because it's not a honeypot, and I can just let people live here for days at a time, or until my $100 DigitalOcean credit ended, whatever came first. So now I thought, okay, well, let's just see, how are people maintaining access? Because one of the things we'll see later, a lot of people just log in and sit there. They don't actually do anything. They just hang out once they're logged in. So, okay, we let people log in. They download some crappy scripts that they've written. Some of the things they call back to are a little suspicious. So this was someone dropped a payload and it was calling back to this IP address. And I thought, okay, this seems pretty easy. I think you're doing something bad here. None of the links even work here. It's pretty easy to link to Twitter on a website. And the cool thing is, dropped in another box, the output of strace connected to CNC. I was like, okay, I think I know what this is doing. It's really great when you tell me what you're doing. You run strings, there's one IP address in there. I have one active connection from this box. Cool. This takes 2 seconds. Naturally, it just tries scanning the internet because, again, this is a lot of the garbage traffic that we see. Someone gets infected and they are just trying to infect everyone else. In this case, it's just looking for other people that are infected with Mirai across the internet. But the cool thing was it keeps calling back to that one IP address on port 1312. It keeps trying to log in and get commands to see if anything changes. In my case, it never did. It just kept blasting the internet with scans, which was a bit of a downer because it doesn't make for as good of a slide. But it was cool to watch it. And then over the course of a week, it just stopped logging in. It just kept checking to see if 1312 is open on that IP. As soon as you block it, it stops scanning. So even though some of this is commodity, there are some little tricks that they throw in there that are pretty cool. My probably second favorite thing, because it's hard to have a good talk when payload doesn't do anything. So this was downloaded from someone logged in from Romania. We're still good. You can take all these really unique indicators and all these payloads and find all sorts of fun things, especially when they put their group in there, DedSec runs you, which is just so fantastic. That's part of their payloads. This is really easy to start finding more information because it turns out a lot of these little groups, there is no honor amongst thieves. They're all leaking each other's source code, and you can find it all on GitHub once you have more information. Cool. So I'm still waiting for mine to do something. In the meantime, I have all the source code. So what I did was, there were a whole bunch of bugs in their code. It didn't actually compile. It didn't actually work. I fixed them all. I rewrote it, and I put it on my GitHub. So if anyone wants to use a botnet, I fixed all their bugs, and it's available. I renamed it cashmoneybot. I took out all the horrible phrases in there. It actually works really well now. It's super cool now that I got it running. So I'm sorry if anyone ever sees this in their logs. You can tell me I did something bad, but it has a really nice interface for managing all of your bots that's connected to it. It has all the attacks in there that you can run, which turns out some of them are just stolen from Nmap. And then there's a whole bunch of other features in there, which I still haven't actually figured out how they work. There's things in there where you can charge users money and keep track of how much time they're spending in there. Their user management is great. It's all just logged clear text, which was fantastic. Even just the user login, you could overflow it very easily, which I fixed all that. So it actually works really good now. Thank you. Anyone can find it on my GitHub. I'll put the links at the end if you want everything. But while I was waiting, on my own server, it didn't actually do anything, but I figured in the meantime, I should try to help out. And all of the code is available, cleaned up and commented, and works really nice now. So a lot of this was just letting people log in and have fun, see what they do, but I figured we should make it a little bit harder for people. So let's pick the easiest vulnerability to exploit. MV-powered DVR shell. It's just a request you can send with a command in it. Okay, I can pretty easily mimic that. I write a pretty terrible web app, so great. It's always insecure. So I had someone, they started downloading payloads from a domain that's 27 days old. I love when people use all the free domains because then I just have a list of them trying to register all of the DDNS domains that I was collecting from this. They try to clean up after themselves. But again, really not too hard to figure out what a lot of this is doing. Just a whole bunch of different payloads it downloads. It was packed, but it's pretty easy to unpack UPX. This one was trying to propagate looking for different vulnerable routers across the internet. It's part of the hoax calls botnet, which I had not heard of. And a whole bunch of indicators that are really, really easy to find. And I always love when just people call out their own groups as part of their payloads they're sending. It makes me so happy. Most of it was targeting US, China, South Africa, Egypt, Japan. Because again, now I have my firewall blocking everything and I can just log the hell out of it and see where it's all going. But this really raised another point, and this is a terrible slide in person. This is if you download the slides and want to read everything. We'll make it a little bit bigger so everyone can see this. I found a guide online, how to make money with bots across the internet. It was about a 40-page guide, very well written. They claimed that you can make 25 to 50K a month, which actually sounded pretty sweet. And they had a guide, how to build all your bots, how to set them up, how to connect with people, how to be part of these underground affiliate networks, crypto mining, ad click fraud, referral programs, YouTube views, all sorts of things where you can just make quick, easy money if you want to be a little shady on the internet. My favorite one was, which I actually took it out for some reason, the DDoS service. They had a line item underneath that said DDoS extortion, where you can just extort someone to not DDoS them, but it did have the warning. It said the FBI will get you for this. So there is a lot of practical information in this guide. It's about 40 pages long. It was actually super interesting, but it actually starts to answer a lot of the questions for why do we see just people hammering the internet with commodity malware, commodity exploits that they're looking for, things where we think no one should actually be able to exploit this. There's a lot of devices out there that can be exploited, and I don't know about making 25 to 50K a month. That seems a little high, But you know, some of the other numbers they're putting in there, 2,000-3,000 a month, I'm sure could be easily doable. So there's all sorts of other fun ways to find what people are doing on the internet. I also love Canarytokens. I think it's a fantastic project with a whole bunch of awesome people. If you're not familiar with it, the idea is you just drop a file or something out there. If anyone tries to open it, it calls back to you and you can say, why are you opening this? So it works really well internally. It's a nice thing to drop in there to see if someone's accessing things they shouldn't. Critical passwords 2021.csv. Hopefully no one's accessing that. But what you can do is you can generate these tokens and put them in all of these common locations that people are scanning for. Because now what I can do is I can take all of these different tokens that Canarytokens provide for you, and they send you a nice email if anyone tries to use them. Cool. So I have people logging in. I know where they're trying to download from. Let's put some fake AWS tokens out there in really common places. And people will find these very quickly. They will try to log in with them. This was from a couple of weeks ago when I looked, it's gone way up since then. It was 13 different IPs, 32 times they downloaded it, a couple different countries. And what's cool is you can also find where they're accessing it from. So same thing, they're scanning from one place. Most of them are downloading and trying to access it using the AWS CLI. Most of them are coming from probably places we'd expect, certain VPN providers, a random Windows server in France. But it takes anywhere from 1 to 4 hours between finding that and someone trying to log in with it. My favorite part that I learned about this that actually has no bearing on this, but I always like to throw this in. Oh yeah, I tried making my own tokens and just dropping things on Pastebin. I thought, cool, someone's gonna take this. No one took the bait on this one, and I am still upset about that. Probably the most unsurprising thing, you can set up kubeconfig tokens out there. And I dropped them in really common directories on a bunch of servers. And my favorite thing is not a single person touched them, which really makes me realize nobody wants to deal with Kubernetes. Same thing with WireGuard. No one wanted to take my WireGuard profile. I had just a redirect to /VPN on a bunch of servers. Nobody actually wanted to download these either. No one wanted to use my kubeconfig, but everyone is really big on AWS tokens. And then the other fun thing is, as we start to look at this more, don't leave things exposed to the internet that you shouldn't. I think everyone knows that here, but a lot of times we start to see people doing things like this when they log in. Now it's 2022 and I like FTP, but I feel like there's got to be a better way. Cool. I wonder what happens if I log in. Oh, right, there's a ton of files here. This is a gold mine. I love when this happens. So this was a listing of all of their files on there. And there were all the kind of common things you would expect to see. This was some kind of DDoS Perl script that runs off of IRC. I don't really write Perl anymore, so I have no idea what it does, but the comments were super nice. There was a directory /track. I started digging through all of them. This one was fun. It was a reverse shell that installs on WordPress. Password is MD5 hashed. It's pretty easy to figure out what that is. And it's a really nice reverse shell. So I installed it on my WordPress. Nice way to call back, nice way to manage it. Actually pretty decent interface. But they also left another directory in there called /tracks, which has a bunch of really sketchy PHP scripts. Looks like it's from a couple of years ago, but it's for tracking activity. All of this also on GitHub, so you can see how this works, how people are tracking this. But it had all the IP addresses and user agent information in there from people that they were tracking, I'm assuming, as part of this campaign. And I always like building graphs and charts because it makes it easier to look through like 10,000 IP addresses. About 85% of them were IP addresses in Russia on a specific internet provider. Also a whole bunch of other things in there, a whole bunch of binaries I didn't look at yet. A mass scan with a list of about 24 million IP addresses. Some kind of custom SSH brute forcer with a whole bunch of custom username and passwords in there, which were not ever part of RockU, which was pretty cool. A bunch more kind of crappy PHP scripts for IRC. And again, don't leave things exposed to the internet because eventually someone will find it, even though no one really had any information about that IP address. As long as the credentials are there, my friend, I should say, logged in and looked all this. So to wrap it up a little bit, because I think there's a couple minutes, the other thing that happened, why log in and never actually do anything? So again, I could leave people, let people just stay in here all the time. I had 3 servers. There were about 70 hosts that just stayed logged in over the couple of weeks. Never left, never disconnected. I was logging every command. They never did anything. And it really kind of annoyed me because it just filled up everything. No one can read this, I understand. But it's more just to show there's a lot of connections that were just maintained and no one ever did anything. And it was kind of a bummer. But again, that's when I started to learn. People are just logging in, they're selling access to all these systems. This was a post I found for someone buying access to DigitalOcean and AWS instances. You can get pretty okay money selling DigitalOcean. I learned you get a lot more money if port 25 is open and you can spam off your DigitalOcean boxes. Those are the gold mines. But for the rest of them, you know, a couple dollars here and there, they're selling access for all these boxes. And that's what it looks like, why people are just staying logged in to sell access to all these things. There are a couple different postings, 20, 30 bucks you can buy them for. That even seemed a little high. The other one was 300 rubles, which was a couple of dollars, which seemed more in line with what I would expect. So to wrap it up, it's a bunch of cool things you can still look into. Like I said, I love sharing all the data. I have all of this saved if anyone's interested. Happy to share any of it. Internet's a noisy place. Just because we might think it's opportunistic doesn't mean it really can't be a little bit sophisticated. There's a lot of ways we can use that data. There's a lot we can gather out of there. Patch your vulnerabilities. That's always super important. And like I said, I always like sharing data. So if anyone's interested in anything, let me know. The PowerPoint and all that's online if you want to download it, which I think they make it available also. But feel free, send me an email. Happy to share. So thank you, everyone. And I think we have time for questions, or we can just enjoy lunch.